You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Hello, and thanks for joining Revolution 250, where we look at events that took place 250 years ago this week. This is from the American Revolution Podcast, a short bonus episode to remind you about these important anniversaries from the Revolutionary War. This week, we remember the Battle of Great Bridge, which took place in Virginia on December 9th, 1775. As I mentioned in earlier episodes, the royal governor of Virginia, Lord Dunmore, was forced to flee his home in Virginia as patriots chased him down, even shooting him in the leg as he escaped. Dunmore took shelter aboard a British Navy ship. From there, he attempted to recruit loyalists and organize an effort to resist the patriots, led primarily by Patrick Henry, who had taken over the colony. Dunmore established an outpost at Norfolk, under the protective guns of the British Navy. There he had a single regiment of British regulars, less than 200 men. He had recruited a regiment of about 600 loyalists, known as the Queen's Own Loyal Regiment. He also formed a regiment of slaves who had escaped from patriot plantations, accepting Dunmore's promise of freedom in exchange for military service. This became known as the Ethiopian Regiment. The British had built up defenses around Norfolk, but they received intelligence that the Patriots had occupied Great Bridge, which was about 12 miles inland to the south. Now, most of the land around Norfolk was marshy and largely impassable. A narrow strip of dry ground allowed passage along the Great Road between Norfolk on the coast and the rest of the colony. Great Bridge allowed travelers on the Great Road to cross the Elizabeth River. Finding no enemy at Great Bridge, Dunmore had his men build a small fort on the north side of the bridge, dubbed Fort Murray, which was named after himself. Dunmore's given name was John Murray. Dunmore left a garrison of about 100 men, half of whom were part of that Ethiopian regiment. He also left 2 cannons to deter any enemy from trying to cross the bridge, and he had his men take up the planks of the bridge, making it much more difficult to cross. At the end of November, a Patriot detachment from a Virginia regiment under Lieutenant Colonel Charles Scott arrived at Great Bridge. The British opened fire, preventing the Patriots from crossing. Instead, this force of about 200 men entrenched themselves along the south side of the Elizabeth River. A few days later, Colonel William Woodruff arrived with the 2nd Virginia Regiment and Minutemen from Culpeper. On the British side, Captain Samuel Leslie brought up most of the British regulars and more loyalists to defend the fort. On the eve of battle, nearly 900 patriots faced just over 400 British regulars and loyalists. Despite being outnumbered more than 2 to 1, the British opted to attack. Captain Leslie had received word that the patriots would be bringing up artillery soon and thought it would be better to attack before that enemy artillery arrived. Also, the Patriots were inexperienced and could probably be turned if faced with an assault by British regulars. The British launched their attack at dawn on December 9th. When the British cannons opened fire, the Americans were slow to react. The two sides had been taking potshots at each other for the previous week with little effect. Soon, however, the Patriots saw that the regulars were advancing, led by a company of British grenadiers. Patriot sentries fired multiple rounds at the advancing column before retreating back to the breastworks. One of the sentries was a free black man named Billy Flora, who was one of the few black Virginians permitted to take up arms. Witnesses claim that Flora fired 8 shots at the advancing column, being one of the last sentries to withdraw. The British laid down the wooden planks to cross the Great Bridge and marched on the Patriot breastworks. The Patriots withheld their fire until the British were within 50 yards, then opened up with a devastating volley. The firefight was short but intense. The British never reached the enemy breastworks, their commander was shot and killed, and the British withdrew across the bridge back to Fort Murray. Because the British had been in an open charge and the Americans were behind their breastworks, the casualties were very one-sided. The British saw 15 men killed outright, including 3 officers, and had another 48 men wounded. Another dozen or so British soldiers surrendered and were taken prisoner. The Patriots, on the other hand, had suffered only 1 man lightly wounded. the British abandoned Fort Murray and retreated back to Norfolk. The following day, reinforcements from North Carolina under Colonel Robert Howe arrived. This much larger Patriot force marched on Norfolk, only to find that the British had also abandoned the city and taken refuge on the British Navy ships in the Chesapeake Bay. Britain and the Loyalists had given up the last patch of land that they had controlled in Virginia. I hope you've enjoyed this Revolution 250 moment. I originally covered these events in episode 77 of the American Revolution podcast. I also encourage you to subscribe for free on whatever podcast platform you like. Thanks again for listening to this Revolution 250 moment on the American Revolution podcast.